At 9:27 a.m. on December 13, 1943, one P-40 fighter was already too late. Second Lieutenant Philip Adair was climbing through thin morning haze over northeastern India when the shape of the formation became clear. 64 aircraft. 3 miles out. Low. Tight. Moving straight toward Denjan airfield. Adair was alone. Below him, the airfield was awake but undefended. 14 C-47 transports sat wingtip to wingtip, loaded with supplies bound for China. A field hospital held 63 wounded men. Fuel dumps lined the perimeter, enough to keep the Himalayan airlift alive for 11 more days. If bombs hit the field, everything below would burn. Adair's P-40 carried 6.50 caliber machine guns. Enough ammunition for 12 seconds of sustained fire. 12 seconds. The Japanese formation was clean and disciplined. 24 bombers in organized elements. 40 fighters layered above and below them, watching the sky. They were flying exactly as doctrine demanded. Escort first. Bombers protected. No gaps. Adair checked his fuel. Full internal tanks. 90 minutes of flight time at combat power. He checked his radio. No friendly fighters within 38 minutes. Too far. Too late. Standard procedure was clear. When outnumbered more than 5 to 1, a pilot was expected to shadow the enemy, radio the sighting, and wait. Survival depended on restraint. This was 64 to 1. If Adair waited, the bombers would reach the field in minutes. If he attacked, he would be dead long before help arrived. The formation was now 3,000 feet below him. The bombers' noses were steady. Their crews were relaxed. They expected resistance closer to the target, not here, not now. Adair pushed the throttle forward. The Allison engine responded instantly, its roar filling the cockpit. Manifold pressure climbed. Airspeed built. The P-40 surged ahead, climbing into position with the sun behind him. No hesitation. No radio call. No request for permission. He had made his choice. One fighter. 64 enemy aircraft. 12 seconds of ammunition. No backup. No margin. By every rule written before this moment, Philip Adair should have turned away. So why didn't he? There was a reason no one else had tried this. By late 1943, air combat doctrine in the China, Burma, India theater was brutally pragmatic. Pilots did not survive by courage. They survived by discipline. Every engagement was governed by ratios, probabilities, and rules written in blood. One rule mattered more than all the others. Never engage when you are outnumbered more than 5 to 1. That rule wasn't theoretical. It was statistical. In the previous 8 weeks alone, Japanese air raids across northeastern India and northern Burma had destroyed 47 Allied transport aircraft on the ground and killed more than 100 personnel. In nearly every successful attack, the pattern was the same: massed bombers, heavy fighter escort, no early interception. Once bombs were released, the damage was irreversible. Denjan airfield was not built to fight back. There were no active fighter patrols overhead that morning. Anti-aircraft defenses were minimal, designed to discourage low-level strafing, not to stop a coordinated bomber stream. The field existed for one purpose: to keep transport aircraft moving over the Himalayas. It was a logistical artery, not a fortress. The Japanese understood that. Their formation reflected years of refinement. The Mitsubishi Ki-21 bombers flew in tight, mutually supporting groups, their release patterns calculated to blanket a target with high explosive and fragmentation bombs. Above and below them flew Nakajima Ki-43 fighters, light, agile, and deadly in the hands of experienced pilots. The escorts were not there to chase kills. Their job was to deny access. To block, distract, and destroy anything that threatened the bombers before release. Against that system, a single fighter was irrelevant. The P-40 itself offered no comfort. By 1943, the aircraft was already being replaced in frontline units by faster, higher-flying designs. It was rugged, reliable, and forgiving, but it lacked the climb rate and turning performance of newer fighters. Against the Ki-43, it was especially vulnerable. In a sustained turning fight, the lighter Japanese aircraft could bleed speed without stalling, tighten its circle, and slide effortlessly onto a P-40's tail. American pilots were trained accordingly. Do not turn. Do not linger. Make one pass, then extend away at full power. Regain altitude. Reset the fight on your terms. That doctrine assumed one critical condition. That the pilot could disengage. Philip Adair could not. If he broke away, the bombers would simply reform. Their navigation was precise. Their timing was disciplined. They would reach Denjan with or without him. Even if he survived, the field below would be destroyed, the transport aircraft burned, the wounded killed in their beds. Shadowing the formation offered no advantage. Reinforcements were 38 minutes away. The bombers were less than 10 minutes from release range. Every option that preserved his life guaranteed failure. Every option that offered a chance of success guaranteed his death. This was the wall no one else had crossed. A single fighter could not destroy an escorted bomber formation. Even killing one bomber would not stop the attack. The remaining aircraft would close ranks and continue. The escorts would adapt, tighten their screen, and hunt the intruder until he ran out of speed, altitude, or ammunition. 12 seconds of fire. That was all Adair carried. Not 12 seconds per pass. 12 seconds total. At best, that meant 6 short bursts. 6 chances to do something meaningful before 40 enemy fighters converged on his position. 6 chances before the physics of air combat caught up with him. Japanese pilots had faced lone interceptors before. They knew how these encounters ended. A few minutes of chaos, perhaps a damaged aircraft, then silence. The escorts always won in the end. Adair knew this too. He was not ignorant of the math. He was not misinformed. He was not reckless. He simply understood something the doctrine did not account for. This mission was not about winning an air battle. It was about breaking certainty. Bombing required order. Formation. Timing. Confidence. Crews needed to believe that the airspace ahead was controlled, predictable, safe enough to fly straight and steady when the moment came to release their bombs. If that confidence shattered, accuracy vanished with it. Adair did not need to destroy the formation. He needed to make it unravel. That meant attacking the bombers first, ignoring the fighters, and forcing chaos into a system that depended on calm. It meant diving into the heart of an escort screen designed to kill him. It meant staying close, staying aggressive, and refusing to disengage even when every instinct screamed to escape. No manual taught this. No instructor recommended it. Every precedent said it would fail. That was why it had never been tried. And that was why, at 9:27 that morning, one P-40 turned toward 64 enemy aircraft and accelerated. Philip Adair was not the kind of pilot stories were written about. He was 23 years old, with 43 combat missions behind him and no reputation that reached beyond his own squadron. He was not an ace. He was not a flight leader. He was not the man commanders pointed to when they needed a miracle. On paper, he was competent, reliable, and replaceable. That morning, he was simply the only one in the air. The 80th Fighter Group did not assign lone intercepts against massed formations. No one trained for that scenario. No one planned for it. If an enemy raid appeared unexpectedly, the expectation was delay and report, not engagement. Any pilot who attacked alone was assumed to be panicking, misjudging the situation, or trying to be heroic at the expense of common sense. Adair knew how this would look if he survived. He would be questioned. Why he hadn't waited. Why he hadn't followed procedure. Why he'd risked an aircraft and a pilot against impossible odds. If he failed, the answer would be simple. Poor judgment. Recklessness. Another young lieutenant who thought courage could replace math. That judgment weighed on him as he climbed. Adair had flown escort for transport aircraft over the Himalayas long enough to understand what happened on the ground when bombers were not stopped. He had seen burned-out wrecks on airstrips. He had seen empty revetments where C-47s had once sat. He had walked past wounded men who had survived combat only to be killed by bombs while they waited for evacuation. Those memories did not make him fearless. They made him tired. Tired of watching destruction happen because the timing was wrong or the numbers weren't favorable. Tired of the idea that survival always meant disengagement. Tired of rules that worked on average but failed in moments that mattered most. Still, doubt followed him into the dive. He was not blind to his own limitations. He knew the P-40 could not outturn the Oscar. He knew that once the escorts reacted, he would be hunted. He knew his ammunition would vanish faster than the situation could resolve itself. Every calculation told him that the best outcome involved retreat. But retreat meant accepting certainty. The certainty that bombs would fall. The certainty that men on the ground would die without ever seeing the aircraft that killed them. The certainty that he would live with that knowledge. Adair did not believe he was special. He did not believe his skill outweighed the system arrayed against him. What he believed, quietly and without drama, was that in this specific moment, doing nothing guaranteed failure. That belief did not make the decision easier. As he rolled the aircraft into position, his hands were steady, but his mind was not calm. He was not thinking about medals or recognition. He was thinking about time. Seconds. Distances closing too quickly. The speed of the formation below him. The moment when the bombers would begin their final run. He was thinking about how quickly this could all end. There was no speech. No internal declaration. No sense of destiny. There was only the understanding that once he committed, there would be no clean exit. Every pilot learned early that hesitation killed faster than enemy fire. Adair felt that truth as he lined up his approach. If he waited for certainty, he would lose the only advantage he had left. Surprise. The Japanese pilots below were professionals. They flew according to doctrine because doctrine worked. They had no reason to expect a single fighter to challenge them so far from the target. No reason to anticipate an attack that made no tactical sense. Adair intended to exploit that assumption. Not because he was confident he would survive. But because, for the first time that morning, the uncertainty would belong to someone else. The P-40 was never designed to survive what was about to happen. At its core, the aircraft was built around one assumption, that the pilot retained control. As long as the control surfaces responded and the engine kept running within limits, the airplane would forgive mistakes. Once those systems failed, forgiveness ended quickly. The heart of the P-40 was its engine. A liquid-cooled Allison V-1710, powerful for its time, but unforgiving when pushed beyond design limits. Coolant flowed through narrow passages in the engine block, absorbing heat generated by combustion before passing through a radiator beneath the fuselage. At normal combat power, the system worked. At sustained maximum power, it was living on borrowed time. The temperature limits were clear. Above 210 degrees Fahrenheit, were accelerated. Above 230, tolerances tightened. At 250, metal expansion began to outpace lubrication. Pistons scuffed cylinder walls. Valves lost their seats. At 260, failure was no longer a possibility. It was a countdown. Adair crossed that line early. Each dive, each full throttle extension, pushed the Allison harder. He needed speed to survive. Speed demanded power. Power demanded heat. The coolant gauge climbed steadily, indifferent to his intentions. Then came the gunfire. Japanese fighters did not need to destroy the engine to kill him. They only needed to disrupt control. The P-40's ailerons were connected by mechanical linkages and cables running through the wings. One severed rod, one broken cable, and the pilot lost precise roll authority. The elevator system was equally vulnerable. Damage there meant pitch control degraded or disappeared entirely. When rounds struck Adair's aircraft, they did not hit a single system. They hit many, incrementally. First came the coolant loss. Green fluid sprayed across the windscreen as the radiator or reservoir was punctured. Without coolant, heat stopped being a gradual problem. It became immediate. The engine temperature surged past redline. Pre-ignition began. Combustion occurred before pistons reached the correct position. The engine vibrated, protesting every revolution. Then oil pressure dropped. Oil was the engine's last defense. It separated metal from metal, absorbed friction, carried away heat. Without pressure, moving parts began grinding directly against each other. Bearings overheated. Connecting rods deformed. The engine was destroying itself from the inside. At the same time, control response degraded. The right aileron no longer behaved symmetrically. Roll input produced uneven results. The aircraft wanted to fall into a spiral. The elevator trim, damaged or jammed, forced the nose downward. Gravity and aerodynamics combined to pull the P-40 into a dive it could not easily escape. This was the point where doctrine ended. Flight manuals addressed engine fires. They addressed control damage. They addressed bailout procedures. They did not address all of those failures occurring simultaneously, under pursuit, at low altitude, over hostile jungle. Standard procedure for an engine fire was immediate shutdown and bailout. That assumed altitude. Standard procedure for control failure was to trim what remained and prepare for impact. That assumed impact was survivable. Adair had neither luxury. At 8,000 feet and descending, a bailout would drop him into jungle controlled by enemy patrols. Survival after landing was unlikely. Remaining in the aircraft meant riding a machine that no longer obeyed conventional inputs. The aircraft was trying to kill him. But it was also obeying physics. Aerodynamics did not care about doctrine. They cared about forces. Lift, drag, gravity, thrust. When an aircraft flew upright, lift acted upward, countering gravity. Control surfaces deflected airflow to shape that lift. When those surfaces failed, lift became unstable. The airplane sought equilibrium, usually nose down, accelerating until impact. But those same forces behaved differently when inverted. Upside down, lift reversed direction. What had pushed the aircraft upward now pushed it downward relative to the fuselage. Control inputs, even damaged ones, also reversed their effects. A stuck aileron forcing one wing down when upright would force that wing up when inverted. The P-40 was never meant to be flown this way for long. Its fuel system was gravity-fed and optimized for positive G, inverted flight starved the engine of fuel. Oil pooled where it was not supposed to be. Negative G pressed blood into the pilot's head, narrowing vision, threatening blackout. But for brief moments, inverted flight offered something upright flight no longer could. Control. When Adair rolled the aircraft inverted, the broken system stopped fighting him and started working for him, accidentally. The damaged aileron forced the correct correction. The jam trim pushed the nose toward level instead of down. The aircraft, which had been accelerating toward death, slowed its descent. It was not stable. It was barely flyable. But it responded. This was the blind spot. Every system failure that doomed the aircraft upright created a narrow window inverted. A window measured not in minutes, but in seconds. The engine sputtered as fuel flow became erratic. Power surged, then faded. The pilot could feel the airplane slipping toward uncontrolled motion again. So he flipped back. Upright to feed fuel. Inverted to regain control. Upright to keep the engine alive. Inverted to keep the aircraft from diving. Flip. Descend. Flip. Climb. This was not flying in the traditional sense. It was negotiation. A constant bargaining with physics, trading one danger for another, never eliminating either. The manuals never imagined this because no engineer designed for a pilot to fly a dying aircraft upside down for miles. But the airplane did not know what it was designed for. It only knew forces. And Adair was learning, moment by moment, how to use those forces against the failure trying to kill him. There was no moment when Philip Adair told himself this was a good idea. The decision did not arrive fully formed. It emerged under pressure, built from seconds stolen from a situation that refused to slow down. By the time the engine temperature crossed into the red and the control response began to soften, the choice had already been made. He was committed. Turning back now would not save the aircraft. Reducing power would not undo the damage already done. Every system that mattered was failing, one after another, regardless of his intentions. The only question left was how that failure would end. Standard procedure demanded disengagement. Standard procedure assumed survival was still possible. Adair looked down through the canopy and saw the bombers again, scattered now but not gone. Several groups were attempting to reform. They were fewer, disorganized, but still within reach of the target. If they stabilized, even briefly, bombs would fall. He could leave. He could dive away, nurse the engine until it quit, and bail out while he still had altitude. That option remained open for a few more minutes. It was the last clean exit available to him. But it would leave the job unfinished. The Warhawk shuddered as he pushed it back into a shallow dive. The Allison protested, vibration traveling through the airframe and into the control stick. The coolant gauge was useless now, pinned beyond its limits. Oil pressure was dropping, the needle sliding toward zero with deliberate indifference. He knew what that meant. An engine without oil pressure did not fail instantly. It destroyed itself slowly, grinding its own internals into scrap until something seized or snapped. When that happened, power would vanish completely. The aircraft would become a glider with too much drag and too little control. Adair chose to spend what little life the engine had left. He aimed for the bombers again. This was the decision that broke the rule. Not the decision to attack alone. That had already happened. This was the decision to stay close when every instinct demanded distance. To remain inside the escort screen instead of extending away. To trade speed and altitude for proximity and pressure. He fired short bursts, deliberately. No spray. No waste. Each trigger pull was measured against the knowledge that ammunition was disappearing faster than time. He did not need to destroy the formation. He needed to keep it unstable. The Japanese pilots responded quickly now. Fighters closed in from multiple angles, their movements sharper, more aggressive. Surprise was gone. What remained was persistence. Rounds struck the aircraft again. The right wing took hits. Fabric tore. Metal buckled. The control stick grew heavier in his hand. Inputs produced delayed responses, then uneven ones. The aircraft no longer felt like a single machine. It felt like several broken systems arguing about which direction to fail. Adair did not try to fight the fighters. He ignored them. He stayed focused on the bombers, forcing them to react, to evade, to scatter again just as they began to stabilize. Each pass cost him speed. Each pull-up cost him engine life. Each second at combat power shortened the countdown. He was not winning. He was buying time. The difference mattered. Then the fire started. It was not sudden. There was no explosion, no dramatic burst of flame. It began as smoke, thin at first, seeping through seams in the cowling. The smell followed, sharp and unmistakable. Burning coolant. Hot oil. Electrical insulation. Fire in a liquid-cooled engine followed a pattern. If it reached the fuel lines, the aircraft would not remain intact. Adair knew how much time that gave him. Not much. He had crossed the final boundary. Every rule that existed before this moment assumed a functioning aircraft, a functioning pilot, and a functioning plan. None of those applied anymore. The only thing still working was his ability to choose the next action. He kept the throttle forward. He kept the pressure on. He stayed close until the bomber formations finally broke apart and turned away, their attack dissolved into individual retreats instead of a coordinated strike. Only then did Adair turn toward home. The engine was dying. The aircraft was damaged beyond recovery. The fighters circled, watching, waiting for gravity to finish the work. The rules were gone now. What remained was survival. For a few minutes, the situation bent in his favor. Not because the odds had changed, but because confusion had. The bomber formations were no longer clean. They were broken into fragments, groups of aircraft flying close together without the spacing or alignment required for a coordinated release. Some crews were climbing. Others were turning away, unsure whether to press on or regroup. Bombing required precision. What Adair had created instead was hesitation. That hesitation was everything. He stayed high enough to see the bomber's movements but low enough to force reactions. Each time a group tried to reform, he appeared again, diving through their formation with just enough aggression to shatter it. He did not linger. He could not afford to. Speed was his only remaining shield. The escort fighters reacted faster now. The Oscars no longer chased blindly. They anticipated his dives, positioning themselves between him and the bombers, forcing him to maneuver harder, bleed energy, spend engine life he did not have. The sky around him filled with movement, intersecting paths, tracers flickering briefly before vanishing into the haze. Adair could feel the aircraft degrading beneath him. The control stick no longer responded evenly. Roll input to the right required more force than to the left. Pitch response lagged, then surged unpredictably. The P-40 no longer flew cleanly. It wallowed slightly, as if something inside had come loose and was dragging the rest of the machine with it. The engine vibration worsened. At high power, the Allison sounded wrong now. Not a steady roar, but a harsh, uneven growl that transmitted directly through the airframe. Each second at full throttle was shortening the distance between function and silence. He checked his instruments again. Coolant temperature was beyond the scale. Oil pressure was falling. Ammunition was disappearing at an alarming rate. What had begun as 12 seconds of fire was now less than half of that. Behind him, the fighters closed. For Oscars dove in from above, their approach tight and disciplined. Adair rolled left, pulling into a shallow climb to maintain speed. Tracers passed close enough to register as flashes rather than streaks. One burst struck the right wing again, tearing more fabric free, exposing structure beneath. The control response changed immediately. The aircraft rolled slightly without input, a slow, unwanted drift that he had to counter constantly. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Something important was no longer connected the way it should be. He forced the aircraft back toward the bombers anyway. This was the dangerous illusion of control. For the moment, his actions still produced results. The bombers broke again. One group turned southeast, abandoning the approach entirely. Another jettisoned altitude in an attempt to escape pursuit. None of them were lining up for a proper run anymore. On the ground below, Denjan was still untouched. That knowledge mattered. It did not make him reckless. It made him stubborn. He stayed in the fight longer than doctrine allowed, longer than the aircraft was built to tolerate. Each maneuver came with a cost. Speed traded for position. Altitude traded for pressure. Engine life traded for seconds. The warning signs multiplied. Smoke began seeping into the cockpit, faint at first, barely visible against the sunlight. The smell followed quickly. Not fuel. Coolant. Hot metal. Electrical insulation beginning to burn. Then the engine coughed. Just once. A brief hesitation in power output, almost imperceptible, but enough to register. Adair adjusted the mixture instinctively, trying to keep combustion stable. The response was delayed. Uneven. The engine caught again, but weaker. The escort sensed it. Their attacks grew bolder. They pressed closer, firing longer bursts, forcing him to maneuver harder than before. Each evasive move demanded more from an aircraft that had less to give. He could feel the onset of another problem. His breathing grew heavier, but not from exertion. The air in the cockpit tasted wrong. Acrid. Thick. Smoke was no longer just an inconvenience. It was entering his lungs, clouding his vision, dulling his thoughts. Carbon monoxide. The danger was subtle. There was no pain, no immediate alarm. Just a slow narrowing of awareness, a creeping sense that everything required more effort than it should. His hands still moved correctly, but his reactions lagged by fractions of a second. In combat, that delay was lethal. He forced himself to focus. One more pass. Just enough to keep the bombers from stabilizing. He dove again, this time closer than before. Tracers walked across the fuselage of a bomber attempting to hold formation. The aircraft broke away sharply, abandoning the run entirely. The remaining groups followed, peeling off in different directions, their attack finally dissolving into retreat. The mission was effectively over. But the fight was not. As Adair pulled up, the engine surged, then dropped sharply in power. Smoke thickened, rolling past the canopy seams. The vibration intensified, no longer a warning but a symptom. Fire followed. It began beneath the cowling, invisible to him at first, announced only by heat and the sudden, unmistakable smell of burning oil. The aircraft shuddered as if struck again. Power fell further. The control stick went slack for a moment, then heavy. The aircraft began to descend. Not sharply. Not yet. Just enough to signal that gravity was no longer being fully resisted. The escorts did not attack. They circled above him now, confident, patient. They had seen this before. A damaged aircraft, losing altitude, smoke trailing behind it. They did not need to rush. Time was doing their work for them. Adair was still alive. The aircraft was still flying. But control, the fragile thing that had held the situation together, was slipping away. The moment Adair turned for home, the P-40 stopped pretending. The engine was still running, but it was no longer an engine in the way pilots understood the word. It was a wounded machine producing just enough uneven thrust to delay the inevitable. Smoke poured from the cowling. The cockpit air grew thicker, sharper, hostile. He should have shut it down. That was what the procedure said. Fire meant shutdown. Fire meant bailout if altitude allowed. Fire meant you saved the pilot, not the airplane. But the jungle below him was not an emergency landing field. It was green and endless and full of places a man could disappear and never be found. And he was already low enough that a bailout would not be clean. The Warhawk was descending at a rate that felt small now but would become final within minutes. He chopped the throttle, trying to reduce heat. The engine RPM fell, the vibration changed, but the fire did not disappear. It only softened, as if it were waiting for fuel again. He leaned the mixture briefly, starving the engine for a few seconds at a time, then pushing it forward so the Allison could catch again. The engine coughed, sputtered, nearly quit, then returned, rough, weakened, alive. It was not a fix. It was a delay. The Oscars stayed with him. They did not fire. They circled above and behind, watching his smoke trail, watching his altitude bleed away, waiting for the moment he would have no choice but to crash or surrender. One fighter slid close enough that Adair could see the pilot's head and goggles. A gesture followed. Downward. A clear message. Land. Give up. Become a prisoner. Adair did not answer. He kept his eyes forward, toward friendly territory that might as well have been a different world. The cockpit smoke grew worse. It was no longer just engine smoke. It was electrical, burning behind the instrument panel where bullets had torn through wiring bundles. The smell clawed at his throat. His eyes watered. His thoughts began to slow in ways that frightened him more than the fire. Carbon monoxide did not announce itself like panic. It arrived like fatigue. Like confusion. Like a soft hand closing around the brain. His vision tunneled slightly. The edges grayed. His mouth felt dry. His hands remained on the controls, but the connection between intention and action became delayed, as if his body was receiving commands through mud. He slid the canopy open to clear the smoke. Wind blasted into the cockpit, tearing at his goggles, ripping smoke out in bursts, but it also made breathing harder. The slipstream was harsh, turbulent, and cold enough to feel like a physical force. Then the controls changed again. The right aileron went soft, too soft, then failed completely. The aircraft rolled right without command. The nose dropped. The P-40 entered a dive that Adair could not arrest with normal inputs. He hauled back on the stick and felt almost nothing. The elevator response was damaged, partial, unreliable. The dive steepened. Altitude fell faster than his instruments could translate into meaning. The jungle rose to meet him in a way that felt unnatural, as if the ground had become impatient. This was the point where most pilots died. Not in the fight. Not in the fire. In the final seconds when the aircraft ceased to obey and gravity did the rest. Adair had seconds to choose between two deaths. Right side up, the damaged control surfaces were driving him into the ground. But inverted, the physics would reverse. If he rolled the aircraft upside down, the same broken aileron that forced the right wing down would now force it up. The jam trim that pushed the nose toward the jungle would now push it away. The failure itself might become an accidental control system. It was an idea so wrong that it didn't belong in any manual. It belonged in desperation. At 1,800 feet, Adair rolled the P-40 completely inverted. -G slammed him against his shoulder straps. Blood surged into his head, turning the world red around the edges. His stomach lurched. The engine sputtered as fuel feed became erratic, then caught again, rough but producing power. And the nose came up. The descent slowed. Not stopped. Not fixed. But slowed enough that the next minute was no longer guaranteed death. He held the inverted attitude for as long as he dared, seconds that stretched into a strange, violent calm. Airspeed stabilized near the edge of control. The aircraft responded, barely, like an injured animal that still understood fear. Then the engine began starving again. He rolled upright to let fuel flow properly. Immediately the damaged controls pushed him back toward the dive. Altitude bled away. He waited until the descent accelerated, then rolled inverted again to claw back a few hundred feet. Flip, climb. Flip back, descend. Flip, climb. It was not graceful. It was not sustainable. It was a rhythm of survival measured in altitude gained and altitude lost. He was not flying toward home in a straight line. He was staggering toward it, fighting the aircraft's failures with repeated reversals, like a man pulling himself forward by his fingernails. Above him, the Oscars watched. For a moment, one dove closer to inspect, perhaps expecting to find a pilot out of control, moments from impact. Adair saw the fighter drop in and made the only move he could still control reliably. He rolled upright directly toward the Oscar, forcing a collision geometry that demanded the Japanese pilot break away. The Oscar peeled off. The second followed. The escort decided, quickly, that this wounded American was unpredictable enough to be dangerous. They turned east, toward Burma, leaving him with the sky and his failing machine. Adair continued the inverted upright cycle for miles. His fuel gauge still showed usable fuel, mocking him. Fuel was not the problem. Oil pressure was gone. Coolant was gone. The engine was running on friction, momentum, and whatever microscopic film remained on metal surfaces that had no business moving anymore. Every second it continued to run defied mechanical logic. Then Nagili appeared ahead. A strip of runway. Rivette positions. The geometry of safety. But a new problem arrived immediately. Landing gear. The P-40's gear system was hydraulic, driven by engine power. The engine was barely producing anything. Adair reached for the gear lever. Nothing. No movement. No drop. No reassuring thump. Without hydraulic pressure, the gear would stay locked up. And a belly landing, with fuel still aboard and fire damage already present, could turn the aircraft into a torch the moment it hit. He needed the gear down. The manual hand pump was his last option, 28 strokes to build enough pressure. But he couldn't pump with both hands and fly at the same time. The controls were too damaged. Releasing the stick would invite the dive again. So he improvised. He loosened his lap belt, wrapped it around the control stick, looped it through the seat frame, and cinched it tight to hold the stick near neutral. It was crude and unstable, but it bought him seconds. He grabbed the hand pump with both hands and began pumping hard. 5 strokes. 10. 15. The cockpit shook with each movement, his body fighting smoke, -G hangover, and exhaustion. At stroke 23, resistance increased, pressure building. At stroke 28, he heard the sound he needed. A heavy mechanical thump. The left main gear locked. Then the right. Drag increased immediately. Airspeed fell. The Warhawk sank, now heavy and wounded, gear down but still alive. The runway was ahead, close enough to reach if the engine held together for just a little longer. And then it quit. The propeller windmilled, then slowed. The engine sound vanished, replaced by wind and a thin whistle of air over damaged metal. The P-40 became a glider, and it was a bad one. Too much drag. Too much damage. Too little control. The runway was close, but not close enough. After surviving 64 aircraft, after surviving fire, smoke, poisoned blood, and broken controls, he was about to die short of safety. That was when the last insane idea returned. Inverted. One more time. At 1,800 feet, 1 mile short of the runway, Philip Adair rolled the P-40 inverted for the last time. The aircraft was no longer flying in any conventional sense. It was gliding on damaged wings, landing gear extended into the slipstream, control surfaces barely connected to intention. Inverted, the drag changed. The descent slowed. Not enough to feel safe, but enough to reach the concrete ahead. Blood rushed into Adair's head again. His vision narrowed, then blurred. Carbon monoxide and -G worked together now, compressing time, dulling edges, stealing seconds of consciousness. He held the inverted glide as long as he dared, watching the runway approach from an angle no pilot was trained to see. At 200 feet, 300 yards from the threshold, he rolled upright. The damaged aileron forced the right wing down immediately. He countered with everything he had left, pulling and correcting, fighting the airplane rather than flying it. The nose wanted to drop. He forced it up. The elevator responded partially, enough to matter. The runway rushed beneath him. He crossed the threshold too fast and too steep. There was no chance for a textbook landing. The P-40 dropped the last 90 feet in 4 seconds. The main wheels hit hard, compressing the struts completely. The tail slammed down. Metal shrieked. The right main gear collapsed, the wing dropped, and the aircraft ground-looped violently, spinning in a shower of sparks and concrete fragments before skidding to a stop. Smoke billowed from the engine compartment. For 12 seconds, Adair did not move. Then he released his harness, stood, and climbed out onto the wing. His legs failed him. Ground crew reached him before he fell, pulling him clear as fire crews rushed in. The engine was destroyed. Piston seized. Crankshaft warped. Coolant and oil everywhere. The aircraft would never fly again. But the airfield was intact. Intelligence reports confirmed what the ground already knew. All 24 bombers had turned back without releasing their ordnance. No bombs fell on Denjan. No transport aircraft were destroyed. No wounded men died in their beds. The Himalayan airlift continued without interruption. 3 days later, doctors examined Adair and found carbon monoxide levels in his blood high enough to cause unconsciousness. He had flown the final 11 minutes of the mission in a state that should have made coordinated action impossible. On January 8, 1944, he was awarded the Silver Star. The citation spoke of gallantry and determination. It did not mention inverted flight. It did not mention the broken rules or the improvised solutions. Those details did not fit neatly into doctrine. Adair flew 95 more combat missions. He became an ace. He survived the war. The P-40 did not gain a new manual section. No training syllabus was rewritten to teach what he had done. Modern air forces prefer solutions that can be repeated. This one could not. What remained was not a lesson to be copied, but a reminder. That sometimes survival is not about having the right machine, or the right numbers, or the right doctrine. Sometimes it is about recognizing when none of those apply anymore, and refusing to stop thinking anyway. On December 13, 1943, one pilot did not win an air battle. He simply refused to die when every system around him said he should. And that was enough.